Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to askNK. Finally, Blender 2.90 is officially here. So a new dawn is upon us, and it's just very interesting to see that we can now march forward with the 2.9 series of things. Now Blender 2.90 actually comes with a huge set of features and also some pretty cool addition and updates. So without further ado, we're going to dive directly into Blender and take a look at some of the interesting things that you would probably find worthy of working with while getting into this new era of Blender 2.9. So with Blender open, let's talk about the user interface and the updates that's been done. One of the major updates that you would notice is within the shader nodes. So if you simply select the shader nodes and go all the way down, you would notice that right now we have colored sockets. Now this colored sockets actually matches what you need to plug into them. So we have the base color, and of course you can notice it has a color, we have the surface color, and also the emission. These ones that have this yellow colors actually specify that you need to plug color textures to them, and all of the grayed out ones you need to plug in a black and white texture. Something else which is very interesting to see is right now if you choose to attach any modifier, so for example let's go with our favorite, which is a subdivision modifier. Right now, once you choose to throw that in, you can now click over here and click on apply, or click right here to do duplication. And still speaking about things that you can do right over here, you can choose to push these and play with these things around. So for example, let's also go in there and throw in something which is like wireframe. For example, you can toggle these back and forth, so you can get the wireframe first and then you can get the subdivision later, or you can do this back and forth. And while we're talking about things that you can play with your scene, there is also an update over here. So if you simply right click now, you can be able to see your status and several stuff, and you can choose to turn them off. Right click, you can turn them on, and for example we want to get the video memory and we want to get the scene statistics, we can also do that right over here. And speaking about the scene statistics, there's also another beautiful update to that. So let's say for example we have the cube right here. If I press tab on the keyboard, I can simply go over to our viewport overlay and scroll all the way down to this section where I have statistics. So I can turn this on, and of course I will be able to see the number of edges, faces, triangles, and the number of objects we have right here. I'd like to also tell what version of Blender you're using. In previous versions of Blender, we did not have the Blender dialog box that pops up. But right now, if you click the Blender icon and click on About Blender, you'll be able to see what version of Blender you have, when it was built, and all of those beautiful things that you want to know. So these are some very cool improvements that are now here for the viewport. And speaking about some other very cool improvements that you might want to take a look at is modeling. So the modeling section also has some interesting cool tools. So some of the interesting tools that you can now play with while working with Blender 2.9 is, for example, the extrude manifold. So how we can get this going is press the tab key, switch over to faces, select any face, and if you simply go over to the extrude region section or the extrude section, you can now grab the extrude manifold. This is going to be very useful for a lot of people. So right now you can just select any part and extrude that part. And for example, let's say I press I on the keyboard to make an insertion, I can just click and grab this, select a different part like right here, click and grab that, select a different part like right over or underneath this, and I can cut this part out. So this one is going to be very useful for a lot of persons, and if you're coming from SketchUp, you will feel at home while working in Blender. So amazing tools are right here. Some of that tool that is very amazing that is also here is the bevel. So when Blender 2.83 was out, we did see the bevel feature, come in with several stuff. For example, the profiling, the styles for the profiling. But right now it has also been updated a bit more. So if I go over to the bevel section and select the bevel, click and drag, you would notice right here we have bevel. So if I click this bevel and I choose to switch this to custom, I would get this huge gigantic place where I can make some changes. So at this point I can choose to play with presets, and we have a couple of presets. I can choose any of these presets I want, and if I simply select any of them at this point, I can initiate a Bezier curve handle. So how we can do that is simple. I can select any of these parts. So for example, let's say this is the part I want to work with, and then I can just simply initiate this Bezier curve, and then we can work with this. You may probably not see these updates because the segments is turned down. So if I simply go through and start increasing the segment and start making these changes, you would now notice that. It's very interesting to see that we now have the Bezier curve handles, and of course I think it's going to be a very welcome development for several persons. And speaking about some welcome development, let's talk about the UV editor. So the UV editor now has a pretty cool feature that is known as the correct face attribute. So for this next example, what we need to do is get a brand new scene, which I'm going to go over to File, New, and General. So let's get this out of the way. So with this brand new scene, all we need to do is stretch this all the way there, raise this a bit up. So I'm going to switch this over to UV, and let's see, we made it short. Switch this over to UV, then switch this over to shader editor. Now with this shader editor right here, what we need is a texture, and a brick texture to be precise. So I'm just going to type the word brick, and right here we have a brick texture. So by simply selecting that, connecting this over to the base color, I can select this, go over to the node wrangler, and add a texture setup. So by simply adding that texture setup, if I select this object and press tab on the keyboard, you can see what we have. Now if you go over to the options section, there's a brand new transform option section that can help you correct the face attributes. Now what this will do is, once you turn this on, let's go over to shading so we can see what we have. And by the way, this is supposed to be coming from the UV section. So once that is done, you will now notice that we have our texture properly positioned right here on our viewport. Now what happens is, with this option active, if you select any part of your object, let's go ahead and select the face, and then let's turn this on so we can see everything. And if we choose to start moving this, what would happen is automatically we can adjust the UV and also the vertex color by simply moving the mesh component. So I can select this part of the mesh and also move this. So let's move this in a given direction like so. And we can also select this and move it in another direction like so. So this is definitely something interesting, and of course I do know that a lot of people would find this one very rewarding. So without this feature, what happens is, once you select an object and you try to move it, you end up stretching your texture. And speaking about the UV, there is an edge ring select, which is a very interesting feature. There is also a pick shortest path, which is also very interesting. Of course, we've covered these in the channel, so simply go over to the link in the description where you can check that. And it's very cool to see that right now in Blender you can pick the shortest path the same way you can pick short paths directly on your viewport. You can now do the same thing directly in your UV editor. You can also choose to use the pick shortest path type to actually fill an entire grid, and at the same time there is an amazing UV rip tool that is also available. So the UV rip tool is something I really like. The same kind of functions that you have directly on the viewport is also the same kind of functions that you have with your UV. So for example, with a scene like this, what we can do is we can simply select individual components. So the component that this supports is both the vertex, edges, and face. So we can go in here, select, let's say 1, 2, 3, something like that. Click on this tool, and then you can click and drag this out. Something else that you can also do is you can choose to switch this to faces, select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can use V, which is a shortcut key for that, and you can now split this apart. This is going to help a lot of people that are working within the UV to easily cut out their UVs and get some cool stuff happening for them. Some other very interesting things that is also right here that you can also go ahead and check out for yourself is the curves. So directly here with a brand new scene, how that works is this. So the curve now has something very interesting. You can now have handles for the curves, and it doesn't matter if you're dealing with knobs or any other kind of curve. This is actually something you can do. So let's say, for example, I have this one right here. What we can do to get things going, press tab on your keyboard, and of course you notice we have these handles. How you can get this is you can go through and see these handles by the normals. All right, so you can now turn on the normals if you want to see them, visualize them, however you choose. Yes, you can. You can also choose to select these handles or view all of the handles at the same time, or view them by selected. So I can go over here and say I want to see all of the handles, and I can see them, and then I can just say I would like to see just the selected one or none. So if you're a huge fan and someone that likes working with curves, there you go. So these are some of the nice modeling updates that is here. There is also a transform modeling update that is also here, which makes sense. And of course, we just talked about the ocean modifier that you can also use to generate some very cool maps, and also some spray direction. So for that one, you need to get a brand new scene, and then you need to select the object, go over here, select the modifier, go all the way down to ocean, and then you can generate foams if foam is what you want to generate. And then of course you can also generate spray. So we've already talked about how you can generate foam. Link is going to be in the description where you can check that out. Some other cool things that are now here is for the sculpting. So now that we've talked about the modeling thingy, all of the modeling stuff that you like, let's talk about the sculpting. So the sculpting now has some very lovely stuff. For example, if I just simply go through and let's drop this, Actually, let's close this. All right, so let's jump back all the way to this section, and then previously, while you're sculpting, you do one of these two things. Okay, it's either you're throwing a couple of subdivisions or you're using DIN topo. But Blender 2.90 now comes with an amazing multi-resolution modifier. So if I go over to the modifier section, and then let's get the multi-resolution. The beautiful thing about this one is it is fully supported for sculpting. So if I switch over here and jump over to the sculpting mode, or to the sculpting room, I can press F on the keyboard to zoom this out. Of course, we can go in and subdivide, but it actually gets interesting when you go over to the subdivision section and you subdivide this. The amazing thing about this one is while you are here trying to figure out how you can, you know, get the most out of this sculpt, and you're doing this stuff, so you can choose to go back one level, another level, see how much details you need to use to get your build up, go up another level, now start adding these details. This makes more sense as you're not just sculpting and sculpting, but you can sculpt in some sort of procedural fashion, as you can switch between levels and at the same time get some pretty cool information of how much you're displacing a particular object. So at the end, you can switch between what you need for production and what you can use to bake displacement maps. So this one is a very good one for me, and of course I'm very excited about it. Something else that you can also do with the multi-resolution modifier is to cut down on the geometry size. So for example, right now, if I simply select this monkey, press Z on the keyboard and go over to wireframe, you would notice that we have a huge wireframe going on here. So what can we do? What we can do is we can simply go over to modify, go all the way to where we have our multi-resolution, and right here we can choose to unsubdivide this. So I can click, and unsubdivide this particular object. You can see for sure that we have, you know, turned this down. So let's bring that down. And another cool thing that you can now do with this is, even if you choose to subdivide and get to a higher level, you can go to this section and click on delete higher. Now what will happen is it's going to delete the higher resolution of, you know, the X number of resolutions that we've had, and it's going to simply plot what we have right now as a resolution of 5 and lock that to our particular model. So if I tap Z and go over to solid, we can go down one level, which is going to be 4. Actually, let's do that on the viewport. 4, 3, 2, and 1. And it's very interesting to see that the multi-resolution has been reworked, and now this is being tied up with the sculpting feature that exists here in Blender. So real quick, let's talk about another interesting update that is here for the sculpting, and that has to do with the cloth filter. So there are 4 major filter types that are available with the cloth filter. There's gravity, inflate, expand, and also pinch, and all of these things do come in extremely handy. So for example, if you want to inflate certain parts, of course you can do that. If you want to run gravity through certain parts, of course you can do that. You can also use your face sets to art direct what you're working on at a given time. And for those wondering what the brand new icon for the cloth filter would look like, this is what it is. So it's pretty cool to see that we have that there. So if you choose to subdivide some more, of course you can do a lot of things. So just press M on the keyboard, select any part which you would like to mask, select the cloth filter, and then you can cause gravity to happen. If you would like to also get, you know, the expand, you can choose to do that. If you would also like to get the inflate, you can also inflate this and get something pretty heavy like that. So depending on what you're trying to work on, you can have all these things happening for you. There's also some very cool improvements that deals with the sculpting toolset that is also here. So the pose brush is also one of them. It has a face set IK mode which you can use, and of course we've already talked about how you can use the pose brush to translate, scale, squash, stretch, those beautiful things. And for those who like to style their sculpt and may not really feel very comfortable with rigging, you know, doing the whole retopology process, this one is going to be very, very handy. The clay strip brush has also been reworked, as this looks way better, and right now it has a much more predictable pressure, and in terms of size, strength, and also how you can play with the curves, the whole deformation algorithm has now been modified properly, so you can use this and do some very heavy and large deformations. So these are some very awesome stuff. The topology slide and relax now has 3 different deformation modes. So if we simply select the slide and relax, okay, and jump right over here, you would notice that we have the drag, pinch, and also expand. So you can also choose to use these things and get some pretty cool stuff happening for you. So if you like to drag some parts, yes, you can drag that topology and do some stuff. If you would like to, you know, expand, of course you can also use that to do some expansion. And if you like to pinch, you can also use this to pinch. And for those who will be wondering, what about the mesh filter? Yeah, mesh filter does have a couple of updates, but I think you should chill out for this one, as it does have way more updates coming to Blender 2.91. So interesting things are here. The auto masking system has been redesigned, and for those wondering about the grease pencil, there are a couple of updates for the grease pencil. The onion skin support, that is for annotation in the video sequencer, that is here. There is a layer mask. There is also some very cool stuff. So the last time where we talked about annotation tools, we did talk about the brand new ones that you can now have here. So if we jump over to object mode, actually let's go over to layout and then simply select the annotation line. This has a new improvement, as right now you can choose how each ends of the line should look like. So if you would like to make the start be an arrow and maybe this an open arrow, right now you'll be able to get that. You can also choose whatever you want, square right here, and maybe you would want to have a square right there, and right there you can have that going for you. Some other notable improvements consist of the fill paints for vertex color mode and the tint tool. There are also a couple of these things, so I'm going to put link in the description for you guys to come through and check these ones out. Rendering. So Cycles now makes use of Intel Embraer for ray tracing when you're working with the CPU, and this one is a very good welcomed development. And I think before we even talk about Cycles, let's just jump over to Eevee and see some improvements. So right here, if I go through and create a very simple grid, scale this grid all the way up, raise this about, let's just simply keyframe this at the point where it is. So we'll just simply come right here and inside the keyframe, go over to 10, and let's say I'll make this about 10, press the enter key and press I to add that keyframe, go over to 20, and then I can set this back to 0, and then tap I on the keyboard to add that keyframe. Okay, so with this done, if we simply go back and forth, you see we have this. Eevee now supports motion blur. So if we jump over here, go over to Eevee, right now you might probably not see anything happen. Now the reason why is because we haven't turned on motion blur, and even if you do that, you don't see that on the viewport. You need to render this to see. So if I go over to render image, let's simply change our camera position. So press 0 on the keyboard, press the home key, press N on the keyboard, and then go over to view, select camera view, and at a point like so, if we simply go in there and hit the render image, you would notice that Eevee now supports motion blur. So if you choose to play back, go all the way up and down and just simply press F12 on your keyboard to get that render happening, you can now see motion blur there. Something else that is also interesting that Eevee now supports is the fact that you can now use the sky textures directly in Eevee. So I'm talking about no other sky texture than the HOSEC and also the preterm. So if you switch over here and go over to your shader editor, and then let's switch this over to world, zoom all the way in, hold down Shift and A, click right here and type the word sky, click enter or press enter right there, and right now you notice we have the Nishita. But then let's talk about the preterm and HOSEC. So if I click right here and connect this to color, you can now see that we have this over here. It just makes a lot of sense to see that you can now have some sort of decent looking sky texture right here in Eevee. All right, so you have that there. You can also switch this to the HOSEC, and of course you're going to be able to also do that if you like to control the world, control how this looks. Yep, you can do all of this controlling right over here, and you can get some pretty cool effect and also some pretty cool results. Now let's talk about some updates to Cycles. So now that Eevee has the preterm and HOSEC, you might be wondering, what is the Nishita? Nishita is a brand new sky texture type that is now available for Cycles. So the same thing is what we're going to still render with. So I'm going to also switch over from Eevee and jump over to Cycles, and at this point you can now see what the Nishita looks like. Actually, you can see a side-by-side comparison with the previous version that we have, and you can also see what it looks like with HOSEC and what it looks like with Nishita. So the Nishita seems to be a very nice looking one, and for the most part it's a single scattering sky model that simply accounts for altitude change as well as the ozone layer absorption. So you can actually come in and make some changes if you want to play with how you see the air, if you want to play with the dust, if you want to play with the ozone. Yes, you can. So if I simply tone this down and push this backwards and just push the ozone a little bit more, you can start seeing all of that improvement. You might be wondering, why in God's name is askNK rendering with a CPU? Of course, you can now switch to GPU and get the best out of it. So previously, it was only supported for RTX card, but right now, it doesn't really matter what RTX you have, as far as you have a GPU from NVIDIA that is Maxwell all the way high, and I'm talking about GeForce 700, 800, 900, and also the 1000 series. You can switch over to GPU from here, go over to the section called denoising, and you can get your viewport denoising happening. You can also switch from here to go over to image denoising. And for those having a GPU, if you want to take full advantage of this, you can go over to edit, go over to preference, and once you open up your preference, you can go over to system, and then you can either choose CUDA or optics. Now optics is best if you're using an RTX card, but then if you just simply have a card, you know, you just want to work with that, of course you can go ahead and use this one. So if you also have an OpenCL card, of course you might be able to also do that with this. So you can either choose to use CUDA or optics to get things up and running. So it just makes a lot of sense to see that you have all of these flexibilities, and if you're into working with the denoiser, or maybe you just want to get some cool denoising directly on your viewport, then I do think that you should actually give this one a try. So with all of this said, let's talk about some honorable mention. The Alembic file import export has a huge update that's been done to it. There's also update to the USD. Of course, we do have a couple of news, and at the same time, if you're trying to work with instances, the USD and Alembic export can now correctly export nested instances, and you know, you can go through and read up this particular one. So there are also some very lovely updates as well for the rigging and animation, as Constraints has also had a couple of matrices for negative scale, and right now you can also get some very cool stuff while working with drivers. And for those who are thinking about library override, yes, there is library override right now, and there are several updates and stuff that you will definitely take advantage of. And for anyone who is thinking about data duplication, baking, motion control, there's just, you know, a tiny bit of updates here and there, nothing too elaborate or fancy, but it just makes a lot of sense to see that these updates or this brand new release of Blender 2.90 actually touches every single thing. So contrary to some other softwares which end up just focusing on one particular part and neglecting every other part, Blender 2.90 comes with a huge set of tool sets, and also at the same time there is a huge set of updates to almost every single part of Blender as a tool. And that's about it. I would like to know what you guys think about all of this in the comment section. Blender 2.90 is finally here. A new dawn is, you know, upon us, and of course this comes with a huge set of updates and incredible features. If you want to get Blender, or you want to get some pretty cool add-ons that you can work alongside with Blender that will make your life easier, there are links in the description that you should probably take a look at. And that's about it. I would like to know what you guys think about this in the comment section. And of course, if you like this video or you learned something from it, you can go ahead and give it a like, and don't forget to share with a friend. And if you're new here, it's going to be amazing for you to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications so that you don't miss the next video or the next update. And until I see you guys again with a tutorial update, Free Friday, Tutorial Tuesday, tips and tricks, things like this. Peace.